Hello watch enthusiasts! With watch prices rising every year, it's true to say that value is very much the order of the day in terms of what people look for in watches, and especially watches that one wants to wear every day of the week. And so today I'd like to answer the various questions people have had about affordable watches on this channel, because I'd like to produce the 2018 edition of the best value watches under £1,000. And this is by no means a complete list of watches, because that really would go on for a very long time. But I'd like to address a few different watches to last year's offerings, and pieces which offer value in a different way to different types of buyers, in terms of giving you something robust, a very elegant watch, something reliable, and something which you really can enjoy on a daily basis without it breaking the bank. The first watch I'd like to talk about makes for an excellent all-rounder, a piece to be worn at work every day in the evenings. Though of course one can't use this as a sports timepiece, it works beautifully as a reasonable, affordable and reliable dress watch. And this watch is heir to one of the most popular watches at this price range produced in recent years, which is the Orient Bambino. This new version is the Orient Bambino Small Seconds, which retains a stainless steel case with an elegant mix of brushed and polished finishes, but now with small seconds and a date. Now the watch features a 40.5mm stainless steel case with a rather slim size of 12mm, which is admittedly added to as a result of that domed mineral crystal. And whilst this watch doesn't have a sapphire highly scratch resistant crystal, the mineral crystal on this watch, which equates to a slightly lower scratch resistance, is by no means bad, and for this price range is exactly what one would expect. Indeed, the doming of the crystal is something out of the ordinary, and beyond what one would expect for this price range, giving the watch a very attractive 1950s style of aesthetic, which is played off very, very nicely by the wonderful hands, and the very careful mixture of polished and brushed elements on the case. Of course, the aspect of this watch which really jumps out and creates a real beauty to this timepiece, which I really wouldn't expect at this price range, is the dial. And the dial comes in a variety of different colorations, from creams to whites to silvers to blacks, but all retain a certain aesthetic with those four numerals at 12, 3, 6 and 9, which are an applied metal to give a wonderful gleam to the surface of the dial, and something which brings out the dial itself and emphasises that domed shape to it, which is highly attractive in my eyes, and does make this watch all the more desirable. And in terms of the finishing and the detailing on the dial, I'm very impressed by this watch, because in addition to those applied numerals, we have matching Dauphine style of hands, which are beveled down their centre in order to give them that sort of sword shape, which is so desired and allows the polishing to catch the light in a very different way, and appear altogether less flat. Then of course there's the piece of this watch which is seen in the name, the small seconds. And these are seen on a concentrically ringed subdial at 6 o'clock, which doesn't intrude on the centre of the dial or the bottom of the dial, which allows you to have a full numeral rather than a broken style to the bottom of the dial. The surface of the dial is beautifully finished as well, with a sunburst effect which is broken by that small seconds counter, as well as by the date which is stepped, as you can see, around its edge. And whilst a lot of people won't like the date, and I personally think the date perhaps wasn't necessary on this design of dial, I think it's been executed very well, and doesn't cause any problems with regards to the aesthetics of the watch, or indeed in terms of making the watch look cheaper than it is. A great looking detail on the dial is that Orient logo with that crest, which is very, very well applied to the top of the dial, and is something we've come to expect from Orient on even their dive watches, as an attractive and well-made detail to add to the dial, which is mirrored on the crown, which is actually engraved with this logo. And the crown is also far more characterful than on previous iterations of this watch, as the crown no longer sits against the case, but rather sits slightly proud, which gives it a more old-fashioned look, but also, more to the point, will make this watch far easier to manually wind, if you do choose to manually wind it, and not use the automatic winding, if you've left the watch in the box for a while, or simply want to get the watch started very quickly. Whilst discussing the movement of this watch, I think it is important to turn the watch over and have a look at the exhibition caseback. And unlike the Bambino, this watch does have an exhibition caseback throughout all of the models of this version, which gives an excellent look into the movement. And I think is something which people do like to see, even if the movement on this watch isn't particularly well decorated, and does see a bit of decoration on that automatic winding rotor, but otherwise is very bare. I do think the fact that this watch is produced for the price it is produced is very impressive, bearing in mind that brands such as Timex have released their more recent vintage-styled offerings, which have far less impressive movements than this watch. Because this watch is owned by Seiko Epson, and so as a result is branded with Epson on the back of the case, as well as the fact that the movement is an in-house movement rather than being a Seiko offering. Whilst the matter of whether a movement is in-house or built by another manufacturer isn't by any means the be-all and end-all of owning a watch, I do think it's nice to have the assurance that this movement has been made for these watches, rather than simply being an off-the-shelf movement, which, due to the low price of this watch, would have to be from a relatively low-priced, low-cost manufacturing setup. And so it does add a certain assurance of the quality, seeing the movement made in the back. And the movement itself offers a manual winding option, as well as an automatic winding option, which again isn't often seen at this price range, and something which was absent on previous Orient Bambino models. The second watch I'd like to speak about is a brilliant new offering from Seiko, which I've mentioned before, but I think fits into this video extremely well, because whilst at this price range one would want a dive watch which is reliable, well made, but also extremely well equipped, this watch offers that at a fraction of the £1,000 price limit. Because this watch at the moment has a list price of £399, however is available for less than £300, as is usually the case with Seiko dive watches. And so this watch is the Mini Turtle, a watch which is a reinterpretation of that 6309 dive watch style that Seiko have so enjoyed the success of. And it's a timepiece which I personally think very much shows the future of what we might see in terms of Seiko dive watches. Because whilst the Turtle, released a couple of years ago now, is a reinterpretation of that 6309 Turtle dive watch, this piece looks towards the future, with a redesigned bezel style, a slightly newer dial, as well as the fact that the crown is now at 3 o'clock with the Cyclops, rather than having the crown placed at 4 o'clock, which builds a watch which is very different in terms of its character, but still retains a playful aspect, with a very professional aspect to it as well. In my eyes, the sizing of this watch is extremely well judged, because it has all the heft one might want from a larger dive watch with its 42.3mm size. However, thanks to a very stubby case in terms of its length from lug end to lug end, this is a watch which actually wears very squat on the wrist, and so as a result doesn't stretch over smaller wrists, but still is sizable enough for larger wrists. And the quality of the case on this watch in stainless steel is very, very attractive, with both polished and brushed elements, with that long brushing along the side of the case, and polished elements on the bezel, as well as the inside of those lugs, creating a brilliantly complex look, but that doesn't sacrifice any of the rigidity and the rugged nature seen in previous Seiko Turtles. Now, the bezel of the watch is again another aspect which is in keeping with Seiko's history, by being unidirectional 120 click, and having a luminescent pip at 12 o'clock. Likewise, it is available in both a Pepsi style with the first 15 minutes in a separate colour, or indeed in a monochromatic colour. But this is graduated all the way around, which again makes this watch a very clear dive watch, and something which is certainly competitive in terms of what it can offer a diver, and indeed what it can simply offer someone who wants to time boiling an egg, for instance. Now, aside from the very well designed and well built bezel, the dial is also a very appealing aspect of this watch, because it's a dial which clearly draws from the history of Seiko dive watches, with some elements from older watches, such as certain models of the Tuner, or indeed the Sumo, with those larger, more luminescent plots. However, these are applied with metallic elements to them, which only add to the appearance of quality seen in this watch, which certainly is reflected by the general build. In addition to that, the watch also features the hands which have become so well known on these models, and I think it uses them to a very good effect here, in order to create a very legible aesthetic, but one which is certainly not going to age quickly, and will look attractive on the wrist for many years to come. And it does have the date at 3 o'clock rather than a day-date complication, but it does have a circular Cyclops rather than a long or rectangular one, which gives the watch a slightly more generally appealing look, and I think is a type of Cyclops indicator and magnification lens, which won't be quite as divisive as the one used on Rolexes. And in terms of how professional a dive watch this is, one certainly does have the quality assurance of the fact this is certified to 200 metres. And by that I don't simply mean the watch is rated to 200 metres, I mean that every single watch is tested by Seiko to that full depth before being sold, which is why it's allowed to be called a diver's 200 metre watch, which I think only adds to the confidence one can have in this watch if one actually does choose to use it for diving. And this is why I think this 200 metre dive watch actually is going to be just as useful to the average individual as a 600 metre or 1000 metre dive watch if you are looking for an affordable option. Because whilst it may not have the highest water resistance, I feel the quality of the components is very much there, such as Seiko's proprietary LumiBrite, which gives an incredibly bright luminescent material and application, which makes the watch all the more practical for an owner. Inside, the watch features the caliber 4R35 from Seiko, which is an in-house automatic hacking and hand-winding movement from Seiko, with a 41-hour power reserve and a 21,600 vibrations per hour beat rate, which means 6 ticks a second. And this means it may not have the highest beat rate, but does mean that one has a very, very reliable movement with the additional functionality of having that ability to hack and hand-wind the movement, which again adds just that little bit of help to owning this watch over long periods of time, whether you choose to go for it on the rubber strap or the metal bracelet. And so I feel this watch is a brilliant option for someone who wants a reliable, robust and highly attractive sports watch for a very affordable price. The next watch moves very firmly into the realm of Swiss-made watches. However, this is a watch which, as far as I've been able to see, is a dress watch which almost everyone likes. And the reason for this is that this is a timepiece which is the Hamilton Intra-Matic. And the Intra-Matic was released a few years ago, but is one of the watches on the market which offers one of the best movements for the price it's offered for, or at least for the price it's available for. And this is a dress watch which is inspired by the dress watches of the 1950s, with that traditional Hamilton style of logo, which appears futuristic and very much of that era of cars with fins and the belief that all cars were going to be jet-powered. And the watch itself is a very simple design affair, with these jutting lugs which have those sharp angular forms of the space programme, but with the polished elements which show that chrome, that luxury of that period. And I think this is combined together extremely well, and I think that Hamilton have really been able to create a watch which is appealing to the vast majority of people here. And so the watch itself comes in either 38mm or 42mm rather, as a variation in size, with the 38mm being far more akin to the traditional size and being a little bit less expensive, whilst the 42 is far more modern, but is slightly more expensive. This wonderful mid-century American style is also seen in the domed sapphire crystal, which allows reflections and light to play across that very, very simple dial in very, very appealing ways, however in a way which doesn't remove and reduce the delicate nature of that dial, which is very, very different to other dials on the market, because generally these domed dials are seen in this minimalistic form with a Bauhaus style, for example, or simply a far more traditional format, whereas here those 50s have been combined very, very well to create a futuristic form to the watch, which is still classically correct, and with that beveled date window at 6 o'clock, it's completely symmetrical with that Intra-Matic text, and of course Hamilton Automatic in that mid-century type of typeface, which has created a wonderful look to this watch, whether you get it with the sunburst black effect or the lighter sunburst silver. It's a beautiful timepiece. In terms of strap options, you can either get it for a reduced price on a leather strap, which does give a more classic sort of Mad Men look to the watch, whilst if you want to go for something a bit more modern and something which is more experimental in form and does carry on with that futuristic style to this watch, there is a fine link bracelet available in polished steel, which only adds to the look of this watch, though will be scratch prone to the owner. The area where this watch shows its value very well, though, is in the movement, because through the exhibition caseback on this watch one can see a wonderfully well presented style of ETA 2892. And the ETA 2892 is a movement which does step above the realms of the ETA 2824, as it has a variety of innovations, and certainly from its period of inception in the mid-20th century, it's been a movement that has really defined the slim but affordable automatic calibre, being significantly slimmer than the ETA 2824, but with a similar power reserve, as well as a greater refinement in its general design, with that inset automatic winding mechanism into the surface of the movement, which allows it to shave off about a millimetre. The pricing for this model ranges from between £660 and £720 for the 38mm version, whilst the 42mm version will be slightly more expensive, between £710 and £770. However, one can usually get hold of these watches for far close to £500, which makes them exceptionally good value, bearing in mind the support that the Swatch Group gives Hamilton, as well as the general aesthetic of this watch, and just how well celebrated this model is, as it steps aside from the style of other Hamiltons, but creates something which is quintessentially of its period, but very interesting, with a brilliant movement. Now for this penultimate watch in the video, it would have been all too easy to speak about the Christopher Ward C60 Trident, which is their professional dive watch with a 600 water resistance, its ETA or Sleater powered movement, ceramic bezel, and really everything you might ever want really for this sort of price range, in a brilliant package. However, the watch I wanted to speak about is something a bit different, because it's still from Christopher Ward, but it's a far more modern piece, released scarcely a month ago. And this watch is the C65 Trident, which is their reduced and vintage-esque watch, which is designed to rekindle the spirit of the skin dive watches from the 1960s, but without any of the inconvenience of those old designs, brought into the modern age. Now, the reason why I think this is such an interesting piece is because this is a market which has been tapped at higher price ranges, but not all that much at this price range. Because this is a watch which takes advantage of the fact that the vast majority of dive watches aren't used in anything more than the swimming pool, or for some light diving down to, say, 18 or maybe 30 metres. And this watch takes advantage of that in the sense that it doesn't have a 600 metre water resistance, nor does it have a very large and very highly legible bezel in ceramic. Instead, this watch takes advantage of vintage proportions, with a smaller case, albeit still to modern standards, with a 41mm diameter, but with a slim 11.55mm thickness, which is really taken up by that very heavily domed sapphire crystal, which gives wonderful view into the dial rather, and gives a beautiful reflection from those hands which have brushed and polished elements on them, along with a very clear and legible dial with 12 and 6 on it, and that bezel, which is very slim as you can see and runs around the edge of that wonderful domed crystal. And this is a watch with its bezel, which is unidirectional and is usable as a dive bezel with a luminescent pip at 12 o'clock, that costs significantly less than something like, for example, an Orient Diver 65, but offers much of the same experience, while still offering a slightly higher water resistance of 150 metres. Which means you can snorkel with this watch, you can even scuba dive with this watch, without any real concern at the depths one would normally dive at recreationally. And of course this is no professional dive watch, but it doesn't need to be. Now the case build of this watch, in my eyes, is a real success, because the very slim bezel still has very clear knurlings on it to be used easily, with that aluminium bezel insert being extremely slim but fully graduated, making it still legible for all the use it may serve during the day, as well as if you do ever dive with it. Then of course one has brushing on the lugs, but a very complex scheme of brushing and polishing along the edges, which creates an extremely luxurious looking build to this watch, and a look which is very far removed from the professional dive watches and the rugged look of a lot of these dive watches one sees. Whilst the crown is very large and is beautifully finished with the Christopher Ward logo, as well as the fact that the crown has been chosen very well at this larger size, because the movement is in fact a Sellita SW210, which is the manually wound equivalent of the SW200, so it really is the equivalent of an ETA 2801, which means it's a manually wound movement with a 42-hour power reserve and a 4 Hz beat rate, giving it a nice high beat and sweep on the second hand, but a manually wound form, which means you do have to wind it up every day, but this doesn't cause any problems in the sense that one will set one's watch every day in terms of keeping it accurate, so it doesn't really increase the use of that crown too much. And with that 150 metre water resistance, the crown still serves a purpose. And along with that brilliant case back finished with that Trident, one does have the case build, which is, as I've said, very beautiful, along with the fact that this watch and its very reliable movement comes in two variants in terms of dials and bezels. Because the watch either comes in black, which is the more sedate option, which offsets the cream of the hands and the dial very well, whilst a blue version, which is far more playful, and has an almost navy style of blue, maybe combined with a certain royal blue, the richness of royal blue on the dial, in this matte form, which creates a more playful, as I've said, and more joyful model, if you will, which is a bit different to the black dive watches one often sees, and gives one something a little bit different to enjoy, with all that charm of the past in a very usable package. And of course straps are also seen in a variety of different versions, from rubber straps for those who are going to use this watch more often in the water, to leather straps for those who want something more casual. And so the price for this Swiss-made but beautifully finished model is £695, making it a very interesting option for someone who wants something a little bit different, with real value and real quality under the £1,000 mark. Whilst the Christopher Ward offers really everything you might need in a package which is stylish but also stripped back, the Damasko DS30 is quite the opposite, however a package which is very wearable and very usable for the vast majority of people, but coming in at £875 offers a watch which is of beautiful quality, but with such a rich wealth of functions, and indeed in terms of technology, this watch is very much ahead of its price. Now at base, this watch is a pilot's watch, and a very simple one that follows in the Flieger styles of Germany, however with a modern and very highly legible design, which is unlike anything else on the market. And this watch comes in at the bottom of the Damasko range, aside from their nickel-free, ice-hardened stainless steel models, which come in at over £1,000. This watch comes in at £875 and has a slightly different case, because the case is 39mm by 9.9mm in thickness, making it appear much smaller, but also far more wearable for smaller wrists, and due to the general shape of the case being very traditional, and in many ways quite simple, allows this watch to have a very wide and broad appeal. However, the slender case doesn't compromise on the water resistance, which is 100 metres with a screw-down crown, whilst it is also negative pressure resistant in order to protect the watch from decompression in an aeroplane. In order to give that water resistance and that resistance from the elements, the watch uses a very high quality set of Vuitton gaskets, which are UV resistant and also chemical resistant, which is very useful for a watch to be used every day. And as a result, I really would present this watch as one of the best options for a daily wear timepiece, aside from a very professional dive watch, because this watch offers a lot of that external resistance, but in a more wearable and far more versatile format. And alongside these UV and chemical resistant gaskets, one has a very clever permanent lubrication system, which is integrated into the crown, which has its own proprietary Damasko crown tube, which is integrated into the case to further this resistance. But the crown is hardened, thus protecting it from bumps and scratches. But this permanent lubrication system gives a very smooth operation and a further resistance to that screw-down crown, which wouldn't be seen normally. Then alongside that, the case itself is a matter of great discussion, because it's bead blasted to give the most rugged outside element. However, it isn't finished in the same way as one would expect. Instead of using conventional steel, submarine steel has been selected for this watch, which is a type of steel used both by Zinn, as another manufacturer, and also by the German Navy as a highly corrosion-resistant form of steel, which also is one of the most amagnetic forms as well, which protects this watch, along with the protection already built into the movement, from magnetism, which is DIN set and also matches with the very high shock resistance also specified by those DIN certifications from Germany. But then, of course, the case itself also is very, very strong in that submarine steel form, and is surface hardened to further that resistance to the elements. And so this watch, despite being quite slim and small, resists the elements just as well as a larger watch would. And of course, under the anti-reflective sapphire crystal on the front, we see a dial which is as pared back and as simple as one could expect, with 3 hands and those very, very highly marked and legible minute markers running around the dial with that crosshair formation, just to further the simplicity of the dial, with the date in black. The legibility is only further increased by the use of very strong luminescence on those white hands and that second hand, along with the rest of the dial, to provide a fantastic view of the watch at any time. And so with its ETA 22836 movement inside, which is shockproof and anti-magnetic, with an automatic rotor and winding, with around a 40-hour power reserve, we have a watch which is extremely well built to be able to deal with anything that life throws at it, as far as a piece which is really the ideal daily watch, with both resistance to the elements, but with a slim size and highly legible dial, which only lend to a very usable watch, which will serve one for years to come. And so the price of £875, provides a watch which is extremely well built to the quality we would expect from Damasko, but costing a little bit less and being perhaps more focused on a more affordable level. However, still offering a great deal of technology which one would hope from this brand, and of course these watches are handmade in Germany, which is really brilliant to know, from a small brand which really knows what they're doing in terms of these very resilient and extremely well built watches. And so, with that, I will conclude this video here, but I would like to know in the comments down below what you thought of this video, because I've tried to include a variety of watches in every different segment, in order to give a very clear scope of the availability and the breadth of the market for these interesting timepieces. And so do tell me in the comments down below which was your favourite, and which pieces you particularly liked in terms of their technology, or in terms of what they offer for their price. And so if you did enjoy the video, then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to be able to enjoy more content here in future. So thank you very much for watching. This is Armand the Watch Guy, out.